My name is Cindy Carter. I am a CFII and an advanced ground instructor. Today, we're going to talk about something very critical: communications. It's so critical that sometimes we've heard aviate, navigate, and communicate, right? So it's one of the most important things that we do. We need to learn how to communicate to make everybody understood. How do we know that we're doing a good job of that? Well, we can measure it in a couple different ways. Are we putting out the right information? Are we easily understood? And do we convey this information in a brief and a clear manner? So that's how we're going to measure our communication skills. First of all, we're going to start out. Phraseology. Please, please, please do not learn your phraseology from the movies. That's really not the best way to learn it, right? We have an extensive chapter in the FAR AIM, don't we, that revolves all around phraseology. Tells us how to say certain things. Altitudes, 4,500. Numbers, niner. Headings, 260. We have a lot of information out there that really conveys and helps us to say the right and the correct phraseology. We need to remember to use that phraseology. For one thing, it keeps us all on the same page, doesn't it? Everybody knows what everybody's talking about. So it really helps to keep us all on the same page. But of course, sometimes that phraseology goes right down the tubes, doesn't it? We get a little busy in the cockpit, or we get a little nervous. Maybe we're dealing with some weather or something like that. Common sense has a real place in the way we talk. And of course, also, plain English does too. That's also a really good thing to think about when you're trying to communicate. Let's talk first about our equipment in our airplanes. Busy airspace is not a real great place to be learning our audio panel, is it? That's really not the best place to do it. Excuse me. What we need to do is we need to learn where our volume output is and all that information, all the buttons, we need to learn those before we get into busy airspace. Practice a little bit on the ground. Maybe go out into the practice area and do a little bit of work with your radios out there instead of getting into the busy airspace. Have a system. And I'm not going to tell you what system to have because maybe my system isn't going to work for you. So have your system and use it. Maybe you want to program in tower and ground on one set of comms and maybe ATIS and departure on another. Really doesn't matter as long as it works for you and as long as you use your system. Stay one step ahead of air traffic control. When you're out there on your cross country and you got auto flying the airplane, look ahead. Program in the next frequencies that you might need. Check the weather at your arrival airport. Kind of try to figure out what runway they might be using, how they might get you into the traffic pattern. So use those times to set up your system and to be a little ahead of the game. This is also a very basic idea, the 4 W's. I bet you all of your instructors taught you the 4 W's. Now, it's basic, I know, but it's also a really good way to be less intimidated by the radio communications because you have a system. You have a way of knowing what you're going to do. So the 4 W's, of course, are, who are you calling? That's pretty easy. I fly out of Asheville, North Carolina. Asheville approach, Asheville Tower. That's pretty easy. Who are you? Diamond 24054. You know, pretty easy to remember. Where are you? Now, sometimes that's a little bit more difficult, isn't it? Sometimes we're not real sure where we're at. Got to check that GPS and see where it is we are. And what do you want to do? Very simple, very basic, but very effective. A very easy way to communicate. Have you ever had air traffic control tell you something you really weren't sure what they wanted you to do? Well, somebody asked me one time, well, I was told to do an immediate takeoff. What did he mean? Immediate means immediate, obviously. You know, pretty English. That's a little common sense, pretty basic English. What about a pilot's discretion? Now, this is going to happen when maybe you're at an altitude and you want to descend. They might tell you at pilot's discretion. So what all that means is that, hey, when you're ready, you know, when you've got time to do it. So that gives you a little bit of leeway, which is kind of nice. What about expedite? I guess that's just a little less important than that immediate. Probably not a good idea to hang around too long. Go ahead and get it done. And what about when able? Another that's very similar to at pilot's discretion. They might say something like this to you when you're exiting the runway, something like that. When able, when you're slow enough to do it. Now, I want to remind you, too, that if you don't understand a clearance, if you don't think that you can do what they've asked you to do, please, please don't accept it, because they're basing all their traffic and everything that they're doing on knowing that if you accept that clearance, that that's what you're going to do. So please, if you can't do what they've asked you to do, don't accept the clearance. If you don't understand the clearance, don't accept it either. Now, in everyday life, we do have some magic words, don't we? Please, thank you. A lot of times it gets us things that maybe we didn't expect to get when we use the magic words. Well, with air traffic control, we have some magic words too, don't we? Standby. Have you ever thought to tell our traffic control to stand by? They do it to us, don't they? Every once in a while, they'll say, stand by. Well, there's times when you're busy in that cockpit, aren't you? When you're busy, you have the window open and the wind just blew your charts all over the place. Stand by. It's a good thing to say. That way we get a little bit of time. Then you can go back to them. Unable. I want you to remember this one, because as pilots, we're taught to be able to take care of the situation, aren't we? We're pilots in command. We're cool. We're good. Sometimes we're not able to do what they ask us to. And we have to remember to tell them. Tell them, again, because they're basing their traffic on what we say and what we do. So enable's really good. Say again. Air traffic controllers never talk fast, do they? Yes. So sometimes, every once in a while, we have to say again. You like this one, student pilot? How many of us still use student pilot? Oh, come on. I've seen real experienced pilots that say, well, every once in a while I tell them I'm a student pilot. I talked to a lot of air traffic controllers, and they tell me that they really want to know if somebody is a student pilot, because then maybe they're not going to expect them to be able to do some of the things that they can ask a seasoned pilot to do. So it's important to let them know if you are a student pilot. So you have to remember to slow it down. A lot of times this happens, doesn't it, when we're busy, when maybe we got a little bit of weather closing in on us, the voice kind of raises another octave and we start talking fast. So one thing to think about is maybe take a deep breath and then key the mic and start talking so that we don't end up talking too fast. Because what happens with that? You have to say it again. That takes up more time, confuses people on both ends, and just creates problems. So remember that not only air traffic controllers can sometimes talk too fast, we do it also. Another issue is the other side of the coin is listening. Too many times we spend so much time talking that we forget that we also have to listen and listen effectively. Some of the problems that we can have, similar call signs. Anybody come across that every now and then? Oh yeah. I actually answered the radio call for an airplane that I used to fly in, and I was not in that airplane at the time. So pretty embarrassing, extremely embarrassing, because I heard about it from the pilot later on. But so that can happen, similar sounding call signs. What about transposing numbers? I like to tell people that I'm dyslexic, so no, I transpose numbers quite a bit. Another issue, and I think this is really a little bit more than almost the similar sounding call signs and the transposing numbers, because we know that that happens. And so we can work with that. But another issue is thinking you've heard something. Expectations. Well, you fly out of the same airport, they've told you this 100 times, this is what they're going to tell me now. Doesn't always happen. So you want to be very careful that you don't expect something and that's what you hear. Anybody use sterile cockpits? Good idea. Those distractions are not only dangerous, but they interfere with communications, don't they? So we want to use a sterile cockpit. In my cockpit, or in my passenger briefing, I like to tell the people that I'm flying with, if I do this, I need everybody to stop talking because I'm listening for air traffic control. I've heard my airplane number, so I'm listening for air traffic control. I like to get them involved by saying watch for traffic and that type of thing, but this is my sign that you need to be quiet so that I can listen. Okay. Somebody bar the door over there because we're going to start talking about airspace, and I know everybody's going to run out because they hate to talk about airspace. But you really can't communicate effectively unless you know and understand the rules in that particular airspace, right? It's difficult sometimes, but we really need to be able to do that. We need to know what they need to know from us. What information do they need? And what are they expecting out of us? We're going to first talk a little bit about Class Charlie and Delta, just the general kind of operations. You ever feel intimidated by them? You ever afraid to talk to air traffic control? That happens. It happens, especially if you're the type of pilot that maybe flies out of a small, non-towered airport. Sometimes it can be a little scary. But when you think about it, it's really not that hard. There's only a certain amount of things that they can tell you, right? If you're sitting on the end of the runway, cleared for takeoff, cleared for an immediate, line up and wait, there's only a certain amount of things that they can tell you. Taxi back to the ramp and call me on this number, which is, of course, something we don't want to hear. But we've heard that maybe a couple times. So we can get prepared for that. Now, Charlie and Delta We know that we have to establish radio communications, right? That's what we need to do. When is radio communications established? It's when your call sign is used. You don't want to think that you've established radio communications if they have just said something like, aircraft calling Asheville, stand by. You want to make sure that your tail number has been repeated. Now, how much do we say on that first call-up? Do we say just our tail number, Asheville approach, Cessna 25054? Or do we give him that whole song and dance? Asheville approach, Cessna 25054, 4.5 miles south of VOR, Sugarloaf VOR, inbound for touch and goes with ATIS Charlie at 4,500 feet. Well, most of the air traffic controllers that I've talked to said just the short version. Do the short version, because after about 2 or 3 words, 4 words, they don't hear the rest of it anyway. So the short version, let them come back to you, and then you can go on. We know under 91.126 that we can land in Charlie and Delta without radio communications. There's a couple things that we might need to do. Squawk 7600, maybe if we can receive, we can get what they're trying to tell us, or we can get the light gun signals. You've got those memorized, right? Exactly, the card from AOPA, right, that you keep on your little lap board? Exactly. Once again, I was doing a ground school, and we went through all radio communications one night, and I told them, I said, next week we're going to go to the tower. We're going to have a tower tour. I think that's also a really important thing to do. So the next night, one of my students came to me and she said, I have tried so hard. I cannot remember those light gun signals. I have tried and tried and tried. And I said, hey, don't worry about it. Once in the real world, you're going to have a little card that you put on your lap board. So we go up to the tower and we're doing all this stuff. And I asked the gentleman, I said, hey, Art, I said, can you show us the light gun signals? So he pulls the gun down. There's this little piece of paper taped to the back of it. And I said, Art, what's that piece of paper? And he kind of puts his head down like this and he says, that's our cheat sheet. So it made an impression on the students that, hey, they're not the only ones that have a hard time remembering them. But have your little card so that you do know what they're trying to tell you. Is it okay to go someplace else? Non-towered airport, maybe? Sure. It's okay. Some people are really uncomfortable even going into a non-towered without a radio. But it's legal, isn't it? And maybe it's the best choice. Depends on the traffic. Patterns with ATC, really pretty simple. You just do what they tell you to do. That's all you got to do. You don't have to make all those radio calls. Just talk to them when they talk to you. But please be ready for the unexpected. Okay, what about special VFR? What do we need? We need at least a mile and be able to stay clear of clouds. And we can request a special VFR. Special VFR is a very useful tool, but you want to be very careful using it. Let's say that you've got 2 miles visibility at the airport, but down the road, you know that 5 miles on your trip, everything is clear. Unlimited visibility. You just want to get out of the airport. You can request a special VFR. Now remember, air traffic control cannot offer this to you. They can't offer you a special VFR. You have to request it. Another issue that I want you to just to think about, make sure that you think about this, is if you're going to use it coming back into an airport, please make sure that there's not the possibility that the airport could go IFR. You know, if you've been listening to the ATIS and you see the weather going down and down and down, and you know that the weather reports are saying that the airport's going to be IFR, be careful, because if you're not instrument rated or if you don't have the charts available to you and you get stuck in an IFR situation, it could be rather ugly. Can you do pattern work with special VFR? Sure, you can do it. If you're at an airport that is going to mix IFR and VFR traffic together, you might end up having to land and taxi back to the end of the runway so that the IFR traffic can come in. So you might spend more time on the ground taxiing around. And with the price of fuel, not many of us want to do that. So just remember that that might be something that might have to happen to you. Here you go, sir. This is going to answer your question. What do they mean? Well, which one? That one right there. So what they want you to do is they want you to report when your base leg is 2 miles or 3 miles from the extended center line of final. That's what they're looking for. Does that help? Yes.
Okay, so it's 2 miles to each other.
Correct. You make your base leg that particular mileage. Uh-huh. Is it a little hard to see? Oh, there's an airplane right here. Yeah, it's not showing up real good.
The question, how do they expect you to estimate that distance if you don't have that information?
You just, yeah. You're guessing anyway. Yeah. Somebody asked me, well, how do you do that when the radio's really busy and by the time you get there, can't get a word in edgewise anyway. So you're pretty much guessing. Yes, sir.
What I do a lot, that's the airspace. It's at least a 5,000-foot runway, so that's about a mile.
There you go.
Look at the runway, that's going to be double the runway.
There you go. That's a good way to estimate distances. Yep. Options. Have you ever been said, you're cleared for the option and wondered what the heck that's all about? Well, you can do a touch and go, a stop and go, missed approach, low approach, full stop. This is not a good option. And remember that it will be runway specific. You're not going to be, unless it's an emergency, you're not going to be cleared to do a stop and go on any runway. It will be runway specific. Land and hold short. Remember earlier when we talked about unable? If you don't think that you are able to land in the amount of distance that you are given, please do not accept that clearance. ATC is expecting you to land in that amount of distance because of other issues, other traffic, some kind of issue. So if you can't do it, please don't accept it. Remember that students are not allowed to do land and hold short. And if you don't know the distance, guess what? Air traffic control has it right in front of them. Departures. I'm going to kind of click through this because I'm sure that you're all probably pretty much aware of the sequence. But one thing I want to emphasize right here is that not all air traffic control facilities are created equal. So you might be in a Charlie that does not have clearance delivery. Or you might be in a Delta that you're not expecting to have clearance delivery, but they do. So remember that it's going to be specific for that particular area. Also with departure, have you ever run across a Delta that has departure and approach? Terses? Oh, that's all that old airspace stuff, huh? But there's still some around. So just remember to know what you're dealing with. New taxi rules, are we having any problems with them? We want to remember that there's no more taxi 2. You'll be given your departure runway, and you'll be given the route, like this little green line here. I don't know if you can see the little green line. See the little green line? You'll be given your initial hold short or runway crossing, but you will not be cleared to cross all those other runways. Those will always be separate. If you're confused, just ask. Ask for progressive taxi. That's always a good thing to do. Are we having any trouble with the lineup and wait? I was concerned about it because we are so wired that when we hear hold and when we hear cleared, that's what we repeat back. And when they come out with the line up and wait, which replaced the taxi in position and hold, I was kind of concerned. But I haven't heard that anybody's having too much trouble with it. So maybe we're doing a good job on that. Is it a bad idea at a non-towered airport? Probably. You don't want to sit on that runway for too long, do you? Class Bravo. Obviously, what we're doing is we're just trying to keep the little guys away from the big guys, aren't we? Trying to keep it all separate. If you're just passing through, not a big deal. Make sure you get that cleared, okay? You're cleared to enter Class Bravo. You can also remain outside and give yourself plenty of room. Okay, now, let's say, now this does not pertain to IFR. This is only VFR because IFR is a different animal. But let's say you're doing VFR flight following and you're talking to a center controller and he gives you a vector into Class Bravo airspace. Are you cleared? I'm not gonna go there. I'm not gonna enter that Bravo airspace unless you are cleared into Bravo airspace. Now, air traffic controllers talk to each other behind the scenes. We might not realize that, but they do talk to each other behind the scenes. But I want to hear the cleared. I've had different situations with different people, and once again, I want to remind you, not all air traffic control facilities are created equal, so sometimes they do things a little differently too. So my suggestion is get that cleared. Make sure you're cleared. What about the other way around? Well, once again, make sure that the controller knows that you're coming into their airspace. Ask, say something if you're confused about it. Okay, let's talk about Air Route Traffic Control Center. I don't know if you can see this map very well, but that's a map of all the centers. Now, once again, IFR pilots, they do a pretty good job of understanding what center is all about, but VFR sometimes don't understand. All those little sections there are further divided into sections. Some are high, some are low, but you might have an air traffic controller that is using several different, or controlling several different sections. So, as you're flying cross country, you might be talking to a different controller along the way, but you might be talking to the same one through several different sectors. So you also might have to change frequencies. They might say, change to my frequency. And remember when you're calling them up that they're monitoring several different frequencies. So how do you know who to call? Well, you can look on a low en route chart and it'll tell you, but you can also look at the airport facility directory and it'll tell you. Flight following, once again, do we just give the basics or do we give the whole song and dance? Well, probably the best thing to do is to give the basics. Approach and departure, what's the difference? It's basically the same thing, isn't it? One, you're going out of the airport, that's departure, and the other, they're bringing you back in from the en route phase into the terminal phase. That's approach. Probably be talking to the same person even. You just happen to, as you're coming in, you call them approach, and as you're going out, you call them departure. It's air traffic controller wearing two different hats, aren't they? Cleared for the visual. You're on an IFR flight plan. You come into the airport and it's 3 miles and at least 1,000-foot ceiling. Now, air traffic controller says cleared for the visual. What goes on now? Well, he can either clear you to the airport or the preceding traffic. He will tell you the distance and the location, 12 o'clock, 2 miles. And if it's with another airplane, he's also going to give you the type of airplane and the altitude of that airplane. So now you're basically just flying a VFR approach. Contact approaches, this is a little different. Now on the visual approach, that's initiated by air traffic control. The contact approach, what you need to do is you need to request that. And that's 1 mile and clear of clouds again. Non-towered airports, they're pretty easy. You don't need to worry too much about them. You don't have to say that second traffic out there. Rutherfordton traffic, Cessna 25054, left downwind 19er, Rutherford. Cut off a little bit of the words there. Remember, what do you need to know? That's what you should be telling the other pilots in the traffic pattern. You think sometimes we get a little carried away with unnecessary? Well, we do, don't we? So be careful. Runway crossing's a good thing to let people know about. Clear the active, but we don't have to say every turn. Please, please, don't be a copycat. Remember, there's somebody out there that's watching you. A low-time pilot, a student pilot, maybe a non-pilot. They're watching you. So if you've got a bad habit and then you're not using correct phraseology, then guess what? They're going to do it too, because they look at you and they say, wow, they know what they're doing, so it must be okay. A little bit about flight service. Of course, it's called radio. Include your frequency when you call them up. You can use them to cancel IFR. Remember that R, that's not for us. That's for them. We can listen over the VOR and transmit on the R, but that R is not for us. Flight watch, of course, this is a great way to get weather en route. And another great thing is if you don't know the right facility, just call out Flight Watch on 122.0. They'll answer you. Who does PIREPs? Good, thank you. You're doing your fellow pilots a critical safety service. Thank you very much for doing it. It doesn't have to be hard. You can just call them up and say, hey, I'm clear. It wasn't supposed to be clear out here, but it's clear. So it's not really difficult. Emergencies. 121.5, of course, we learned that when we were private pilots, didn't we? One thing I'd like to mention, though, but if you are using flight following, guess what? If you have an emergency, all you got to do is click that mic. And you say, hey, they're going to come running, aren't they? So flight following is a great thing to use. It really is. You don't have to switch frequencies. You don't have to go to the 121.5. Just click the mic and ask for help. At this point, standard phraseology might go out the window, but that's okay, as long as you get your point across. And fly the airplane first. Special use airspace. All that information's on your panel, on your sectional. Great place to look and see who you should call, times of operation. Can I fly through a MOA? Sure. What about restricted area? If it's closed, maybe. Warning area? Alert? Sure. Prohibited? Only once. That's all you're going to get. Okay, a little quick review of IFR. Clearance on request. Basically, what they're telling you when you're asking for a clearance on request is to stand by. They've either got people ahead of you, because you call up and you say, I want my clearance to Asheville. Well, and then they say clearance on request. Well, wait a minute, that's what I'm saying. I want my clearance. They probably have some people in front of you, or your flight plan has not been spit out of the machine yet. So you kind of have to wait a little bit. They're putting you off a little bit. So that's what they're doing. They probably don't have the information yet. Non-radar reporting positions. Does everybody remember where you have to report non-radar? What, you got to report if your estimated time of arrival is plus or minus 3 minutes. You have to report procedure turn inbound, missed approach, and any of those cute little mandatory reporting points, right? What about radar reporting points? Unforecasted weather, communications approach or navigation equipment failure, anything that's of safety of flight issues, changing altitudes, changing an altitude on top, VFR on top. What are some of the others? Entering and leaving a hold, if you can't climb or descend 500 foot per minute, true airspeed change, and I know I'm missing one. Am I missing one of them out there? So anyway, those are the places where you have to talk to air traffic control. In conclusion, things to remember. It's all about communicating. It's all about getting that information back and forth. What do they want to know about me? What do I need to know from them? What kind of information needs to be brought back and forth? Standard phraseology. I know sometimes it's not fun. It's sometimes a little cute to not use standard phraseology, but it's really the best thing because then everybody knows what everybody's talking about, right? And another thing that I want to remind you is remember to listen. That's the flip side of the coin. Remember to listen. It's not always talking, is it? It's gathering that information and figuring it out. So please also remember to listen. If you're not sure, just ask. Ask for VFR flight following, ask for progressive, ask, say again. Just ask. Once again, thank you very much for coming. I appreciate it.